Anyway, thanks to the organizers for inviting me to give this series of talks. My first international conference in ages. So what I have in mind is I would like to tell you a little bit about cell theory and what it is. Here's a picture. So now you can go home and summarize the talk. So they are just little. It's a bit disappointing that this is so small. It looks very precise. No, it looks less pathetic, I guess. So we should definitely put the slides online so you can actually make it a little bit bigger. I hope everything will be readable. In particular, there's a little word here, H-cell, probably can't read. And they play a huge role in the representation theory of monoids, which is what I'm going to discuss today, algebras, and then eventually of monoid categories. This is kind of the picture I have. So I have this little cube here, and in the front, so representation theory goes to the back. Categorification, whatever that means, goes to the north, and generalization goes to the, what is it, east, I guess. And this kind of a picture I have in mind. There's a theory of groups, and there's a theory of group representations, and generalized by the theory of monoids, and the theory of monoid representations. And there's a categorification, whatever that means. Using fusion categories, for example, if you want to think of the fusion categories being whatever that is right now, doesn't really matter for now. But if you want to think of fusion category as a categorification for group, and whatever I will define with the last talk, certain type of category. I've read down examples in a second, which you can think of as a categorification for monoid. And then there's a representation theory stored in the background because, well, if you ask me 2 a.m. in the morning, I probably will answer what I'm doing for a living, and I probably will answer I'm a representation theorist. So I'm interested in the part in the back as well. So let me write down 2 examples for you. So kind of already did a good job. You see some examples anyway. So if you like to think about the data division pattern, you really should think about practically, let's say that's all. Switch chalk that really impossible. It's impossible to see. Try again.
There's 2 different kinds of data. That was giving another one. Cool. Yeah, that's better. Right.
The finite group and the example one would kind of which that's really one for each subgroup, and you can act on restriction. What's an example of categorification group and categorification group representation? The other side now ends up to the left. Similar, picture, very nice. Something like this. The lovely book of this, we had a came around the 90s, roughly from work people like Jones. And a really nice book, so by Victor, by Enigel, and the language of it. Not just about representation, and on the other side, it should end up here. Eventually, end up here. Find eventually example taken to divide is observed by models in actually a lot more exotic examples in the last talk, so that really keep example of and an example of representation would be, for example, all right setup, the one right setup, or over categories like that. I really recommend it. And all of these are examples. It's been actually theory. And it always looks very abstract to see it. So part of this black experience we want to call the left. To be extremely explicit, So in particular, what's this for one example? Today we just the monoid case. Because I'm sure.
I think it's the one at the bottom.
The one in the box. Yeah. So this one is the monoids. That's what has the monoids. Tomorrow, I will tell you what survives if we go from monoids to algebra, monoid and coefficients. Special cases of algebras, we ask what survives if we go to theory. So further, and tomorrow, sorry, on Thursday, we will go to the categorical side. I should say here that I never specify what categorify really means, so that makes sense. So that's what I want to do, as I said. The main theory will be the theory of cells. Slowly, and they all look the same, right? But the point is that it's really just always the same. So if you understand the monoids, if you want to run away after the first talk, the monoids are kind of enough, and you can do the rest yourself. First talk, monoid, second talk, linear version, and third talk, the categorical version, for one. Basically, based on those papers. So the main one for monoid is the famous paper by Green from the 1950s. That's 70 years ago, something like that. The second talk, the linear version, it's really in the causalistic theory, which you don't need to understand the linear version, but it's really motivated by the again famous paper by causalistic. And the categorical version is a bit newer, which mostly goes back to work of Mackay, Mazurchuk, Niemitz, and Jean. And I'm going to explain the categorical version. So monoids today, roughly the idea is that I will left for about 15 minutes why I like monoids, and I will explain cells, and then I will explain the representation of monoid. And here's a picture. If you don't know what a monoid is you start with some structure on the set, which is called a magma, and you get to go to it by using, what is it, purple and green, I guess. So you add an identity that's purple, and you have associativity that's green, and you end up with a definition of a monoid. And if you want to go to a group, which might be more familiar, you need to add a red arrow as well, which is a divisibility. So the bottom, what is it? The southeast corner is kind of what I would like to cover, because all of these have a really nice representation theory of matrices. So it's really linear. In the non-associative case, we don't know. And I don't know much about it. So this is where the monoids sit. Whoops. And I get this question a lot, and it took me kind of 4 years to answer it. So here's the difference between semi-groups and monoids. So let me go back. Semi-groups and monoids are related by a purple arrow, so by identity. And I'm kind of completely going to ignore that because there is this nice junction. I never know which one is left and which one is right, but it's a forgetful junction. You can go from monoids to semi-groups by forgetting that you have a monoid, you forget that you have a, and you have a left adjoint, right adjoint, whatever makes sense. Functional in the opposite direction. So that's essentially no difference between those theories. So if you go back here, the purple arrow is really, really harmless. And you'll see that the red arrow is actually really crucial. So I kind of only want to consider the case where there is a distinction by a red arrow. I kind of ignore this stupid nonsense of adding units. In the very last talk, this will backfire, because really what you should do is you should formulate everything in terms of semi-categories, categories without necessary, monoidal categories without necessarily having identities. But the literature on semi-categories is basically non-existing. And that forces you to write down theorems in a very strange style. There's always some blah, 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 and there's part of the theory is completely useless, and you just edit to have a monoid type object instead of a semi-group type object. But it's just me complaining that the literature on semi-categories is not really good. But it doesn't really matter, because there will be some form of this adjunction. Yeah, that's a good point. I don't know how to make this screen bigger.
That arrows and they is right now it's left to the top. Circle red circle.
Yeah.
No, I mean, if you look at the top row, there's 4 arrows like emerging out. Like what if you click on that?
And the toolbar.
Click on the toolbar, yeah.
Um,
The red one's
yes, that's a good point. But the screen won't get much bigger. But it's a bit bigger, that's right. I can try to restart it using a different program. Oops. Quite a few slides. Come on. And we can try to. Can't see anything. That's a good one.
Oh, yeah.
There should actually be a presentation mode somewhere, but I can't see it. So that's a slideshow. Very good. Present a slideshow. They're the same size. Okay, so that's the best I can do.
I'll bring binoculars for
Yeah, so sorry, something not really. So in this case, we don't have a forgetful unit detector apparently, so I can't make it bigger. Anyway, so the whole point of monoid theory, and now I'm running into the problem that the little bar upstairs is now in the way. Okay, so nothing is perfect. So the whole point of monoid theory is to keep track of data loss. If you think about it for monoid, think about a group, and multiplication the group is always kind of vertical. Kind of connected graph, you jump all towards everything else, and in the monoid, that meant you do right. That's the whole point for monoid. You don't have diverse elements. What you need to do is you need to track of the information loss. And cell theory is nothing else than doing that for you. That's it. That's basically. And I'm going to show you how that works. A reason why I like monoids, and it's because this is very small, but anyway, they kind of fit very nicely to the categorical picture. The only difference is, well, in some sense, a category is a monoid with many objects. So everything I kind of say about monoids today will be really nicely reflected eventually on the category. Let me just show you some examples of monoids. Surprise, surprise, every group is a monoid. Much nicer example is anything you can write down in terms of matrices. A little bit of cheating because they don't need to have a unit, but basically anything multiplicatively close to matrices are symmetric groups. Here's a picture of a symmetric group. If I haven't messed up, then this is one line notation, meaning the first strand from bottom to top goes to the second spot, the second strand goes to the fourth spot, and so on. And a monoid version of this would be the transformation monoid. Going into some more details in a second, which is just end instead of aught, right? Automorphism, those endomorphisms. And again, in one line notation, we have something funny like this now, 5, 5, 5, 5, 5, which just means that the 5, 6, 7, 8, the spot go are the same. And have this little merge type. Otherwise, that's a main example of a monoid of a finite form right here. That's like a symmetric. There are more examples. So the second one, for example, right? So I would like to think of what are the standard examples of finite groups? Well, cyclic groups. The first ones are not kind of finite, but I just want to mention them. Those categorification, that's the numbers of the categorification. Second one, so the cyclic monoid, so a to the n is 1. Right? And the monoid version is also called the cyclic monoid. There's now 2 numbers, n and p. So we have an offset. A to the n plus p is a to the n. So it's like the cyclic version, but with an offset. We start cycling around up to some time. What is another good example of finite group? Well, we already have it, and the corresponding monoid is n of 1 to n. Kind of fun fact about monoids. So what I did is I just went to the online sequences of integer as online encyclopedia of integer sequences. And the first entry is the number of groups with given order. And if you plot that, you'll see that it is completely random. So the number of groups is one of those random functions where you really can't say much about it. Looks like a starry night or something. And if you look at the number of monoids, not much is known about the number of monoids, so 8 to 10, but there's a very clear pattern. So there are also a lot of monoids. Let's compare, of course, the numbers are small. Well, let's compare the monoids of order 8, which should be this entry, to the number of groups of order 8. So there are 5 groups of order 8, I guess. And there are whatever 8, 5, 8, 9, 7, 7 monoids of order 8. So there are quite a lot. And they behave somehow more, kind of more well, has a clearer picture of rows, contrast to the groups. And if you look at this, it's kind of a miracle. You can actually say something. The group representation theory, really amazing. Hope everyone likes that. Let's say over the complex numbers. And yeah, I don't know. I mean, it feels like there are so many monoids. You probably can't say all that much. Monoid representation theory might be just as well as the same as representation theory of a general finite dimension algebra, which is not very impressive as a theory. It's actually rather boring. But it turns out that's the case. Well, which is not a big spoiler in some sense, although I probably wouldn't use this talk. So just from this picture, I would have just guessed that this is kind of hopeless and nothing would happen for monoids, and that might be so. There's a mass overflow question: why are representations of monoids not studied as much as representations of groups? Well, I don't know, but it looks like you might underestimate how nice this theory is. So representation theory of groups, classical lecture course. Representation theory of monoids, well, usually don't see it, but it's almost the same, which is quite amazing. Okay, it was hopefully roughly me ruffling 15 minutes why I like monoids. And now we want to do sets. Okay, so there are 3 definitions. They all look the same, so let's just focus on one. So left cell is here. We would like to measure the formation loss of the monoid. So you do this. We define the order. You say an element. What are my names here? X and Y. X is left node. Y. If you can go from, let me see, from X to Y by left would take place some elements. And Y should be times X. In a group, you can go back, right? You just take Z inverse to get the same relation. In the group, and the monoid form. Now this matters to you. Well, Y is somewhat bigger, Y is somewhat further away, something good like. And the equivalence relation to point, usually one to project the order. That's X is equivalent to Y in that equivalent. If and only if this holds in the converse holds. We created said then the same information block, right? Same for right, same for the side. Right, you let ideals like right ideals, 2 side ideals. And the main players sometimes performing it here have a nice insight for you. Main idea forward. So I form those 2 type of cells. Here's a 2 type cell, monoid. And I have left cells in that monoid. Right cells in my monoid. Split my monoid into little matrices. And in the second, the little matrix entity, think of it as a matrix. The little matrix entities are the H cells. L is R, and this is the H cell. L R. And the matrix entities are the H cells. Turns out that they are the main layer. We see very equivalent numbers. Columns are L and rows are R, or vice versa. Sorry? All right, not columns. Absolutely. Very good for me. Let's see whether I have messed up on the slides. Oh no, I haven't. Lucky. So it's the same thing, right? So the cell partition, the monoid was matrix pieces, and J cells, and the left cells, the right cells are scopes, and the H cells are the matrix entities. So J, sorry, so J is a standard notation for left-right cells. So the two-sided cells are usually called J, which is Green's notation. So not quite sure where the J comes from. And the H cells are intersections. So the J cells, the two-sided ones, are matrices with values in the H cells, in the little pieces. And here comes a fun fact. So really, by the way, everything I'm going to show you is absolutely brilliant. It goes back to green and color. But it's extremely easy to show. So it's brilliant in the good sense. It was just a really good idea. The math is not very hard. So to prove all of this. The point is there's an item somewhere. This was the wrong one. Again. Item somewhere. Monoid. We should eventually get rid of.
Yeah, exactly.
I have something like 10 more to go.
All of your ears before I got there. Not the spot.
Okay, let's take it more away. One more spot. I can go to the wall, right? I go to the winning point. Then they will show up at some step. Associated with some H. And even better, every H is just one item, or no item. It's good item. And this is kind of this idempotent separation problem. Okay, so every idempotent sits somewhere in some H, and no H contains more than one idempotent.
So is every element in something?
Yes, that's also, yeah, it's good, very good question. So the J cells give you a partition of the monoid. The H cells give you a partition of the monoid, which answers the question, because that's the partition. But the point here is every E is in some pH, and there's no other than pH. Particularly, if you have an E in the H, and the E is actually the unit of group, and the EH is that's why they're called H groups. Okay. So every idempotent, you look very skeptical. Every idempotent sits somewhere, and as soon as it sits somewhere, you have a subgroup or a maximum subgroup of the monoid. So I'd like to think of them as being blocks of equivalent formation. They just now go around in the little H, because it's a maximum subgroup. I just wrote down what the identity is. And everything is invertible, which is not quite obvious, but it is actually a subgroup. You can think of the relation that moves you around. You can, because they're in the same equivalence class, you can invert elements locally in the group. We will see examples. So the elements are not invertible in the monoid, they're only invertible in that little piece. Right? So they multiply together to this unit, to the idempotent. Let me do the first example. There's always the first example. You might wonder at this point why I have never seen this before. This looks so bad. And the reason is, again, say why I'm not going to start studying this much. And for groups, it's just true. For groups, we have group. That group, then it's one block of information. We just have one single cell, the whole group sits, which is a left cell, a right cell, a J cell, and an H cell, which is extremely boring because you want to partition something to make it kind of break it into smaller pieces. But there is nothing you to partition. It's everything one. And this follows from invertibility. All right, that works really well. You have something like this. So this was y is bigger than x. I can just invert c. Then I get x is bigger than y. And particularly everything goes with the same plot. Always go from one side. That's why you have never seen it. For groups, it's just boring. If you work in the natural numbers, there's only one idempotent in the natural numbers to edit it. You can never go back to add things. Yeah, my little boxes. That's important. Cells. I can only add, so I can't subtract. Let's do this one together. So the cyclic monoid works as follows. The cyclic monoid starts then 5 A, how many do I have here? Right, and then 1 point to start cycling now. Before we do the calculation and all these upwards in the J cells and L cells and R cells. On this one, root of 2 8 and the other one is not like. Right, A squared is not inside the cell. So this is the cell picture of the cyclic monoid. Has some group sitting at the bottom, and the H group is trivial, and it has a group, the cyclic one, sitting at the top, and it's a cyclic. That's why it's also called cyclic. In the middle, you have all this polynomial type behavior, which are not invertible. Okay. That makes some sense. Oops.
Sorry, so A cube is iPhone. Was L more than
In this case, it's A to the 4 is an iPhone. Yes. But there's always one, but we always pick it out because you kind of force the cyclicity on the top cell. We will do this one on the exercise sheets. Sorry, I will do the slide in a second. And it's too small anyway. So basically, for the transformation monoid, we'll see symmetric groups of H cells. In those pictures, whenever you see something colored, it has an idempotent. So here, this one will have no idempotent. It will be a bigger picture in a second. Okay, that's kind of the idea. You have this picture. So there's no particular monoid. I produced this picture using GAP and I just entered a random monoid. And this is how it looks like. So you usually have all these cells and they form some kind of core set. So what you see, the big ones are the two-sided cells, the J cells, columns and rows like left and right cells. And the small entries are all these H cells, and the colored ones are the idempotent. And one block of them is kind of the same information. The further you go away, I think of them as going upwards. The further you go away from the vertical elements, you all end up, the vertical elements will all end up in the smallest one. And the further you go up, the more you have kind of information lost. And this is really explicit. So in your favorite monoid, you can feed it into GAP and it will produce those pictures for you. So it's really easy, not just for a machine, but also for a human. Right, so that's the general picture. You get this partitioning into those cells, forms this little type of, what is it called? Partial order picture, lattice type picture. And everything is a matrix in something. And the H cells are the little matrix blocks. General stuff. Here, so for more examples, again, some random money. So everything can happen. You can have J cells which look like a complete column or complete row or something. They can have idempotents, they might not have idempotents. The order categorize gradients. Remember how many monoids there are. So anything you can imagine will happen. Those are kind of sophisticated things. And it really gives you a lot of information. So the structure gives you a lot of information about the monoid itself. Partitioning into those little blocks. All right, so let me do a very explicit example for you. I would like to do, well, representations of the transformation monoid in the end, and I should tell you about the cells of the transformation monoid. And I start with symmetric group pictures. So really simple idea. I hope I haven't messed up. So it's the same one-line rotation as before. So 1 goes to 2, 2 goes to 4, right from bottom to top. And you get those little symmetric group pictures. 2 examples. And this is the symmetric group on 8 strands, I guess. In 8 strands, on 8 strands, I can't. And it has the usual picture. You can compose everything by just stacking it. In my notation, I think, well, you stack the left one on the top, and you can straighten it out, and you get a new picture in the selected one. So we just invented the symmetric group. And you can check that everything works. So the identity is the boring diagram where it goes straight. You have generators in relation in case you need them. You don't need them in this case, but the usual generators with the crossings. These are not the only generators. So the symmetric group only ever needs 2 generators, but the standard generators would be the crossings, and the relation in these generators would be the braid type relations. Hope that makes some sense to you, because now I would like to do this one. It's a bit more sophisticated. Now the transformation monoids, and the difference is that I allow those merge type pictures, and the dots at the top are just kind of a reminder for myself, which doesn't, for the elements that do not end up in the image. So I will draw whenever I have something like 1, 1 line of take, 1 goes to 1, 2 goes to 1, I draw a picture like this. 1, 1,
That's probably behind this.
yeah.
One.
I have another one that's prime. 1, 1. 21 is the one available. Just air reminder. So this one is right. 2 is not indeed. And these are the pictures you get. The second one in 1 line rotations, 1, 1, 3, 3, 5, 5, 7. If I haven't. Well, that's a transformation model. Proposition is exactly the same. Oh yeah, by the way, you might wonder why is it so unsymmetric? Well, the notion of the map is unsymmetric. I don't have those pictures here. There's a notion of a map from the null map. And a map sends 2 objects to 1, full same objects to 1 that are converse to the board. So this is actually kind of biased my notation from bottom to top or something. And if you do, yeah, stacking, same idea by pictures, and you can write down generator and relation presentations if you really are up for it. And looks at it, it's usually that, it's usually things. So the most important one is the identical relation. Think about 1, 1, it's an identical. Twice, same map, back, swing. This, we have to open straight into the object. Right? Yes. There's a little dot straight, which can be pointed up, there's 2 in the same. Yeah, that's some time. And the cells, and now look at the formulas. We can do this. So, like, let me see whether we get this. Yeah, quite well. You can see smaller strands. So 2 strands. What is the smallest cell? The smallest cell of the cell converts to elements. I guess I get those. And top cell. This. So what? Want to make it nice. This is the end case cell. I don't really know the left and right and all the depends on my conventional stacking. Or if I forgot that, doesn't matter. One of them will be correct. So this is either a column or row. No. And here's how it works. This is the J cell base 0.
Draw a line.
And a line. Right? Either a line going or a steady one. This is J1. And the number here is the number of early strands. It should be a column. Thank you very much, my expert. I put it friends first. Yeah. Good. So the index is the number of first friends. It's a couple diagram. It's the two first friends of the symmetric group with state x2. And well, that's why I clean up the pictures of the just one here, and that's general. So three first friends, two first friends, one first friend. And then all zero first friends. Again, you go to five. And this is an item. I told you this is an item. Here's clearly an item. H group here S2, which is the maximum subgroup of the transformation model in this case. And the H groups both of them are same. It's one. And then the general, we get this picture is transformation model, which actually is really linear model. First friends, and here we have Sn, Sn minus 1, friends with the first case are good. Minus 2, 1. These are all the H. All H's are. There might be H's without invertible elements, without idempotents. But everyone has an idempotent, they always easily draw it, because we form some picture like this. Will always be idempotent. With the correct number of functions.
Always the same data. All right.
Yes. All right, so the transformation monoid transformations is a picture in the symmetric, which is kind of a nice result in itself. It's obviously not due to me. Okay, and that's what I just said. Here's a general picture. So this is T5. The notation here is kind of a little bit weird. So Gap does the following trick. Gap knows the following. I haven't told you. So now, Gap knows the forward 1J, all of these, all of H's, X, and E, and they all like to walk in 1J. So the only thing I need to remember is which ones the idempotents, that's the color. And I would need to remember Gap does it not just in this output, the size or the group itself. So S5, S4, S3, S2, S1. Picture contains everything we need to know. Right? And it's a line, it's always a line transformation model. I just really went through this. It's 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. And you can do the same with favorite diagram monoid, they all work the same. That's what we really do on the exercise sheets. So I skip over this and we'll come back to that on the exercises. Here are a few pictures for those. Again, all of them are lines, so everything will be first friends in the correct way, and they always look. This is. Oh, you can't read it. Sorry. Yeah.
What's the meaning of shaded cells?
Okay, let me say that again. The shaded cells are the ones that contain idempotents. The ones I'm really interested in. I don't care so much about the others. Don't ask too much about the patterns of the idempotents. That's very hard. You can already see it gets pretty crazy. This is a partition monoid, the Motzkin monoid, the Brown monoid. Sorry. Oh, good point. Let me go back to the transformation monoid. As you can see, it can be as extreme as you want. It can be a column, it can be a row, it can be some crazy rectangle. In this case, they are all squares because you have an involution. But so
Is it always a rectangle, like any left cell in this two-headed cell will be any right cell in this two-headed cell?
yes,
Okay. There's no end point.
that's a good point. It's always a rectangle. So the H cells in the section of never this guys are right. That's a cross out.
Yeah. So there's no pattern to the pattern, but is there a pattern to the number of?
Oh, whether you can count the number of items. I also think that's very hard. I'm not saying you can't say anything, but it's certainly helping you. Like for each J cell, we have an idempotent. that's already a statement. But in general, some more sophisticated. I mean, look at this things. Those things. You get, I don't know. Open question for you. Yeah, not much is known about idempotents are very, very complicated. All right. So in the final 15 minutes or ish something, I promised you I go over time anyway. So I would like to use this what we just learned to think about representation. And I just wrote down what the representation is. You can ignore it. And what I would like to write down, but like every statement of a research statement of a representation theory is will always be, I want to classify simple modules of algebra 5. And we want to do the same. So we want to classify simple modules, periodic table of simple representations of my favorite monoid S, right? My favorite monoid S. And the analogy, so by the way, some people call it irreducible, some people call it simple. Here's the reason why I call it simple, because it fits so nicely because the pictures of simple groups is group theory. So simple groups are the elements of group theory. Simple representations are the elements of representation theory. Here's the Jordan-Hurley theorem in group theory, and Jordan-Hurley theorem in representation theory. And the periodic table on the left is chemistry. Periodic table is the classification. Jordan-Hurley is something like simpler something. So I'm not a chemist, I guess. Okay, so what I'm going to tell you is doing nothing more than classifying simple representations, which is kind of the easiest first question you should ask as a representation theorist. It's more sophisticated information. I'll comment on that. But basically, here is the setup. So if you believe in Frobenius, and I certainly do, and it's by now 125 years ago or so, and you work with groups and you go to some really nice field, then you get something really amazing. And group theory, representation theory is one of the smoothest things ever. It's basically character theory in the end, which is kind of a cool statement. And what on earth is going on for monoids? It's a good question. I really thought, as I said, it's not much better than general theory of algebras because there's so many monoids. Just remember the crazy pictures, so on. Let's see. It's not. It's really, really great. That's what I'm going to cover now. So those are the corresponding papers. This one is 45, 42. So this was the main paper by Moon, which I'm going to summarize now in my language, not with the Moon's language. And otherwise, you have Clifford a little bit earlier. In Polichowski, roughly around the same time, the usual nonsense. In the 50s, it was hard to communicate. A lot of papers kind of appeared doing exactly the same thing. And in this case, the Moon and Polichowski paper are basically doing the same. I never read the Polichowski paper. It's very Russian. So, as you can see. And this is a statement. I already have it on the slide. Hopefully you'll remember it, and I will discuss all the ingredients. But this is nice bijection. This is bijection. Consider representations of a monoid on the left-hand side, and simple representation of a group on the right-hand side, which is amazing. We have monoids in groups, and they're very different, but representations are kind of the same. So, I hope this one works. Box here, I have symbols of my fixed monoid. It's not quite simple, that will come back to the notion of the 8 factors per second. Certain notion, 8 factors. J, a J self-contained submicron. One of the big blocks. And then what one corresponding representation of the group, we need the symbols of each. Any of them, therefore, anyway, or as one. Note that color, this is a monoid color. One of these crazy information blocks. This is a group. So the native theory of monoids is essentially the same as the native theory of group plus steps. Which is really good. Right, let me explain the ingredients. We already had the H cells. Left hand side is the monoid, right hand side is the group. And there's this notion of an apex. I have a nice picture for the second. Remember? Next slide. Say what it is. So every simple representation, and it's better simple for simple representation, but I don't know how you're gonna write it out. Jigsaw picture. There it is. Every simple module is something like one of those big J boxes. The J box is open. And it's done in a way that because we have this order, you have all these items in here, such that this is the top one in the order, which doesn't annihilate the model, but everything else will annihilate. And so idempotencies can act as 0 or 1 on top of the simple module. And all the time, all the crap up here will annihilate the model. As soon as some element of the cell annihilates the model, and model, then the relations, the cell relations, force everything else. The apex is top one. Some different example. Oh, good question. Is it actually depending on the field? The statement itself, no. The classification, yes, because the classification is classification. So it's field, it's field dependent, whatever.
And important that that's by chapter.
Yes. Okay, yeah, sure, fair enough. But it's still annihilates it in two higher cells.
How do you choose the area side the like what
So I say again.
so what's the definition of like what on the cellular side of this? What's the definition of the cellular side of this? You guys give the definition of the max.
It's a maximal cell such that the elements do not act as 0 on the one.
What if all I have one set value?
Sorry?
What if all I have one set value is one?
It can't happen because we have to do and so everything, well, when everything acts as 0, it's that the vertical elements. Effect of the cell.
One hollow, it's not so weird.
Right. So here comes monoids versus semigroups. In a semigroup, you need the extra condition that simple module is not affected from by everything 0. Actually, I don't need it. Okay, if you want to remember, so here comes my interpretation. So this is Mun. Here comes my interpretation where the name comes from, which hopefully helps to remember where it's all come from. It's like an apex predator, if you want. So here's my picture. So this is, by the way, a semi-group because I have multiple bottom cells, if you want, seaweed and whatever the other one is. But it's kind of the anti-apex predator. So in my little box here, if your apex is fish, then everything below fish doesn't act as 0, and everything outside acts as 0. So everything outside kills it, like the anti-apex predator. You won't find this picture in the paper of Mon. Okay, and basically what it is, that's what I would like to sell. Call this theorem, call this theorem is H reduction. And I call the existence of an apex which is not completely trivial. I call it the J reduction. But we also get a statement that symbols apex J are only one corresponding algebra, which is 4 from the J side. It's not a very impressive statement. Yeah. This one put it out. Anyway, so here is a picture. I hope is kind of you can remember it in 5 years or so. I would be very happy. So again, question why I haven't seen this before. For groups, this is just groups. I know we have one cell, one is H reduction doing it. It has really nice. The group is saying the representation of a group. I know one corresponding to the representation of a group. It's true, I guess, but it's not very impressive. So that's why we haven't seen it. Here, in this case, we get one, let's say over complex numbers, come back to your question. In this case, you get one representation associated to the bottom cell, you get two associated to the top cell. I say explicitly what they are.
And there's no representation.
For the ones without idempotence. Only idempotence matter. If you don't have idempotence, they don't produce any representation to you. Okay. This is field dependent, so it would work over characteristic 2. The top cell will only produce 1. Here you get the classification by, so this is transformation monoid again. It's very loose. So partitions of 3, partitions of 2, partitions of 1, partitions of n, partitions of n minus 1, partitions of n minus 2. Again, let's say over C. You can make a more precise statement over characters. Yeah. Again, pretty cool actually. Yeah. So explicitly what they are. So the bottom representation is exactly coming back to your question. Namely, the one that survives for the bottom, the very boring representation, is a representation which is just inflated from the trivial itself as a monoid, which means everything exactly equals 0. So that's the one from the bottom. That's both the bottom cell. And the top cell are really just the corresponding representations to the monoid. Okay, let me stress why this is H reduction and why this is absolutely cool. So in general, you have those pictures, they can get as crazy as you want. And what I'm telling you is from each matrix block, you take one entry in the entry determined setting. Right? You have 1000 by 1000 matrix, you pick one entry in the entry determined setting. That's why it's called H reduction. It's one of them, and I can pick any, as long as they contain an idempotent, I can pick any of them. I mean, that's a pretty good statement. Pretty good statement. Representation theory of groups is the same, of monoids is the same as for groups, up to the choice of those little h's.
If you choose a different one.
I could choose a different one, let's say the big one gets the same classification. Choose whatever you want. And Ben just says realize something.
I spent a long time trying to think about the cyclic example of why there were no representations of basic law. And it's not that there's no representations of basic law, there's no simple representation.
That's right. I'm only talking about simple representation.
Okay.
Right. H reductions. It's a huge reduction. Again, for a group, there's nothing happening. So this is boring.
Sure. The previous slide, A dot type by 0, but can you write the next for A?
Ah, that's the previous slide.
They are two units were not an equal here. AF was a
Because the top one is the trivial representation of psi representation to determine the action of A.
What's the dimension of single?
The dimension of simple is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So everything else X is non-zero as well.
It's 5 or 4.
No. It's actually it's just one. Yes. It's completely determined by the picture. That's right. It's just one. Both of them are just one dimension. And you can distinguish them by the action of A, the unit which is H force. Yes. Sorry, A cubed.
I even by 0, like 1.1.
Sorry. So you want A to the 4th, which is the idempotent.
Yeah.
Okay, so you want A cubed.
A cubed.
Not the idempotent.
A cubed
A to the
determined.
4th will always act like 1. A cubed can either act like plus or minus.
That's right. A cubed determined.
Yeah.
I always confuse A cubed with A to the 4th here, but the non-idempotent determined. The idempotent act is
A was then for this right.
Act like 1. But 12 and 1.
why I? Maybe we can maybe we can discuss it in a second. So H reduction. Yes.
So should we understand? I think it was the H showing this one for they also.
They are isomorphic, yes.
Is there a reason that this is?
That's not completely obvious. That's Green's main theorem.
I'm sorry.
Yeah.
What is the actual statement of data direction?
It's still on the bottom. Symbols corresponding to certain apex. As one to apex. So it's symbols.
And dimensions of these things are.
It's not in the statement. That's why this statement knows it's a bijection between sets.
Is there a construction, some sort of construction?
Yes. You choose from the cell and take the hat.
Yeah, okay.
But the dimension also depends on the field.
Yes, because it takes a hat, you can think of it as having a pairing matrix that you write down, and the rank of the pairing matrix is the dimension. And the ranks of matrices are heavily field dependent. So all I'm saying is about the classification of symbols, nothing more fancy. All right, I'm running over time. You can do something more fancy. Here come a few things that I can't really categorify. For example, this one. That's actually the tetraproduct structure is also recognized by the H cell. So that's isomorphism of the protein rings. So as mod, as the tetracategory, no, as a monoidal category, is isomorphic. Sorry, there's no isomorphism on the level of category. The protein rings are the same, which means the character in the form is the same.
Why is it or like why is it?
Because it has multiple rings.
No. Why? What is the ring structure?
That's what I told you. So the biome, right?
The why? What is it called? That's what I'm asking.
The same one.
The same as for groups. I see. So you just use the group alone because that will always work.
There's a lot of hot yeah, there's a lot of hot
There's no duals.
There's no rules.
But there is this.
Some more fancy statements, but I'm not going to discuss it. Let me just finish with this case again. So you get those representations, 3 for the left, 3 for the bottom, 2 for the middle, 1 for the top, 2, 6, and yeah, so we'll find those. Yeah. 5. Yep. We will discuss the cellular representations on the exercise anyway, so you can roll them right now. Let me just finish. Okay. We can do the same for those guys, but we'll do more in the exercise sheets. I promise to go over time. I'm already over time. So let me just start. You should never go over time, right? We can discuss it in a second anyway, so I won't on the next. Let me just finish again by recalling what we have done. So everything is basically a matrix in those pictures, and the matrix entry determines the simple representation. Nothing more, no dimension for anything that's not field dependent, but just the number of simple representations is determined by those groups. That's quite a good thing, right? Groups and monoid representation. And my goal is to eventually categorify this thing. But before I will show you a version of algebra, but that's for tomorrow.